Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the November 15th Community and Public Services Committee meeting to order. And I will start with our land acknowledgement. And at this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of Treaty 6 territory and acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. I'm going to start with a roll call of committee members. Councillor Jans.
Here.
Councillor Tang.
Here.
Councillor Wright.
Here.
And Mayor Sohi is here as well. And we are joined by most other members of council. Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
Councillor Principe.
Hello.
Councillor Stevenson.
Hi there.
Councillor Hamilton.
Hello.
And Councillor Rutherford.
Hello.
Councillor Salvador.
Hello.
And I believe Councillor Rice is joining us online.
Yes, good morning.
Which leaves Councillor Paquette. I think he's with us as well.
I'm with you all the way, Tim.
Nice to see you, sir. I will not take a motion for adoption of the agenda. And please note that if someone could please move and include the changes that are listed on the white sheet.
I'd like to move that we adopt the agenda with the following changes. The addition of 6.1, Community Safety and Wellbeing Priority Action Item Investments, and 6.5, Lewis Farms Facility and Park Expression of Interest.
Thank you. Please vote.
Yes, for me.
Thank you, Councillor Tang.
Yes, for me as well.
Thank you, Councillor Jans.
I'm a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. And Mayor Sohi is yes as well. Thank you. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. Thank you, and that's carried 5-0. Adoption of the minutes of the November 8th meeting. I'd take a motion on that.
So moved.
Thank you. Please vote.
We're just waiting on your vote, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried. Protocol items. I'm not aware of any. So we will move then to selection of items for a debate. Please click on using eScribe. Councillor Tang.
I would like to select 6.1, 6.2, 6.5, and 7.1.
6.1, 6.2, 6.5, and 7.1. Thank you.
And I would also like to select 5.4 and 6.4, please.
5.4 and 6.4. Okay. We're going to try and use eScribe for speaking order if we could. Thanks. Any other selections? Very good. Then I would take a motion to accept all unselected reports.
So moved.
Thank you. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That's carried 5-0. Madam Clerk, would you please summarize what we've approved so far?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This morning, Community and Public Services Committee has passed the recommendations in the following reports without debate. Item 5.1, consumption of cannabis-infused drinks in public parks with a revised due date of January 31st, 2022. Item 5.2, alcohol consumption in River Valley Parks pilot project results with a revised due date of January 31st, 2022. Item 5.3, policy options for alternative financing tools recreation centers with a revised due date of January 31st, 2022. Item 5.5, recommendation update fire rescue services additional information with a revised due date of March 7, 2022. as well as item 6.3, license agreement with Edmonton Minor Hockey Association for 2021-2022 winter ice arena rentals.
Thank you. We will move now to requests to speak. We have 3 requests. Take a motion to approve those requests.
I move that on the November 15th, Community and Public Services Committee hear from the following speakers in panels when appropriate. For item 6.5, Lewis Farms Facility and Park, Paul Andrews from the Edmonton Rosenthal Community League, from Kelly Cromwell, Lewis Estates Community League, and for item 7.1, sidewalk repairs and accessibility issues, from Tanya LaRiviere from Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Tang. Please vote.
We're just waiting on one more vote, Mr. Mayor. Perfect, we have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried 5-0. Requests for time specific on the agenda. I believe we have one from Councillor Knack, and I'll make that request, and that would be that we review, as a member of the committee, I'll move that we review the item 6.5, Lewis Farms Facility and Park expression of, oh, hold on. That's right. Expression of interest, item 6.5, and that we hear that at 2:30, and that is more or less to accommodate the availability of speakers on that item. So I will make that motion. Any objections or concerns? Please vote.
And we have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That is carried. So if our speakers are tuned in, we'll be starting the Lewis Farms item at 2:30 this afternoon, which takes us to councillor inquiries. Not aware of any inquiries this morning. Reports to be dealt with at a different meeting, we have none. Requests to reschedule a report. So we will now move then into items that have been exempted, and that will take us to item 5.4. And I'll go to Councillor Wright. You selected this item.
That was for Councillor Knack to speak on.
Well, if there's none one from committee, then I'll go to Councillor Knack to ask his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask, I know the Community League has submitted their formal business case as of probably a week or two ago. What I wanted to double check is when we talked about this last, we talked about doing some of the work concurrently so that we didn't have to lose time on it. The one specific item that I think is worth asking about is the removal of the MR designation on the land. So there has to be a public hearing for that. And based off previous direction, I think we can move that forward while we're still reviewing the business case. And I just want to double check that is in fact what is going to happen on that. We're not going to only hold up on the business case now, and we're going to do both bodies of work at the same time.
Councillor, we'll certainly follow up with our colleagues to keep that ball going.
Okay.
The only reason it was delayed in terms of coming to this meeting was just in terms of agenda management for committee.
Absolutely.
There's so few committee meetings between now and the new year. So, and that was one of the ones we believed we could push forward.
Perfectly fine. And I know that the community was a little delayed in getting the business case to the city, so I don't have any issue at the time. I just wanted to make sure that we were going to do all the bodies of work at the same time. Yep. Still, and not.
Rest assured, we will not park the work.
Wonderful. Excellent. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would take a motion to pass the recommendation in item 5.4.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Which takes us to item 6.1. And I'm sure, Mr. Smythe, you have a presentation.
We do have a short slide deck on this one. Just load the slides up here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and other members of City Council in attendance, Good morning. I am here today with Jackie Ford, who's here in person, our branch manager of social development. And also with us online is Mike Chow, our director of social inclusion and social identity. And we also have John Wilson from our peace officer area. On the next slide, to set the context for this report, first, this report is one of a number of upcoming reports being advanced to council related to community safety and well-being and anti-racism. The community does continue to identify opportunities to address systemic racism and improve support and services to people experiencing racism. The need to address the broad societal issues and better support individuals in our community is clear. Allocating one-time additional funding to the community through the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee is an immediate step that will help to address these issues. In July of 2020, Council made a multi-part motion in response to the non-statutory public hearing on the Edmonton Police Commission. This motion directed many bodies of work, including the creation of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Task Force. Report before committee today begins to answer another part of that motion as seen on the slide. And just like to reference the slide a little bit, that administration prepare amendments for council's consideration to reduce Edmonton Police Service budget from 2021 levels by $11 million, with reductions split over the 2021 and 2022 budget years. And that administration redirects savings realized to fund supportive housing construction grants to end homelessness and to fund programs and partners within the community development, human services, social safety net ecosystem with advice and budget recommendations from the Community Safety and Wellbeing Task Force. Administration is here today with a recommendation to redirect funds held from the Edmonton Police Services budget to programs and partners within the community development, human services, social safety net ecosystem. These recommendations are based on what we heard and what we are still hearing from community. On the next slide. This slide basically shows the investments made with the $5.5 million that were made available for 2021. Funds were allocated, at the top part of the slide, to advance 2 programs and services as directed by City Council. One-time funding in the amount of $3.75 million for the Community Investment Operating Grant for 2021. These are funds that support a range of not-for-profit organizations with operational expenses. And secondly, $300,000 to support the work of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Task Force. So the report today then addresses the remaining unallocated funding of $1.45 million. On the next slide. So now to the recommendations then in our report. Administration is mindful that in many cases, services to address the issues we're addressing are best delivered by communities, and that these community organizations need to be resourced appropriately. Our recommendations acknowledge that the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee is, at this point in time, the best mechanism to bridge our traditional approach to funding that are often very transactional to systems within BIPOC communities and build more meaningful relationships and to evaluate impact from a different perspective. The first recommendation on the slide then is to allocate $1.174 million to the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee to distribute to community organizations to support anti-racism projects and services. This is one-time funding. In addition, administration is also recommending that $100,000 be invested to enhance community engagement with BIPOC communities. Often these communities experience barriers to traditional public engagement methods. Funding from this will be used to ensure participation through the provision of honorariums and helping grassroots organizations host sessions. This approach could begin to inform and integrate the community safety and well-being work with the anti-racism strategy motion that was passed recently by Council. On the next slide. 2 project proposals were made directly to administration that we are also recommending for one-time funding. These two projects will begin to address urgent and emergent issues arising from impacted communities that have disproportionately been affected by recent racist incidents in our city. Both projects align to recommendations in the Safer for All report. The first project, with an investment of $45,000, looks to build supportive and protective factors for Black, Muslim, hijab-wearing women in targeted geographic neighborhoods. With this funding, a Safe Walk program will be piloted in the spring in a Northeast Edmonton Community League that will then partner with a group called the Sisters Dialogue. They will upscale offers of allies and other community members to walk Black, Muslim, hijab-wearing women and create more visibility and support people going to and from public transit stops and other appointments. The partnership bridges relationships between a BIPOC-led organization with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, as well as between neighbors that live in the same neighborhood. The second project, with an investment of $81,000, looks to address the collective adverse impacts of community trauma on the health and safety of communities of African, Caribbean, and Black descent. One of the important conversations this project will facilitate for communities is the significant impact and long-term effects of vicarious trauma, living the emotional residue resulting from constant exposure to violence through personal lived experience, stories, and social media footage of hate-motivated violence being perpetrated against Black Muslim women. The project will look to hire a psychotherapist counselor familiar with anti-oppressive models of mental health care to provide spiritually and culturally supportive psychotherapy to Black Muslim women as needed in individual and group sessions. These two proposals set a foundation of what the additional funding allocated to the Additional Racism Advisory Committee grants and/or one-time calls for proposals could generate moving forward by community-led initiatives. On the next slide. In addition to the recommendations for investing in community, the report also describes 5 areas for potential future investment. These are only starting points for future community conversations. It's just short commentary on each of these 5 areas. The first bullet on the slide. By addressing gaps for Indigenous Edmontonians, this investment would look to increase the availability of culturally appropriate, trauma-informed services for Indigenous people, including access to shelter. The provision of an Indigenous-led shelter in Edmonton would recognize the unique experiences of Indigenous people experiencing homelessness and provide Indigenous-led support to reconnect individuals to family, the land, spirituality, housing, and other dimensions of Indigenous homelessness as defined nationally. Second bullet on the slide. Enforcement-based responses to encampments do not address the root causes and do not adequately support individuals in a sustained resolution of their homelessness. To better support those living in encampments, this investment would increase social service responses to those in encampments. Thirdly, alternate approaches to bylaw enforcement involves providing a person-centered and trauma-informed approach to current social issues rather than solely traditional enforcement. This investment would connect marginalized people to resources that support their basic needs and well-being, as well as long-term, stable support, ultimately reducing the need for enforcement response. And fourthly, enhancing 24/7 crisis outreach and support is another proactive action to understand gaps in services and opportunities for enhancement of supports to outreach teams, crisis supports, and mutual aid groups. Working together as a community of providers to identify gaps and opportunities, this investment could enhance the community's collective ability to help people connect with the most appropriate supports and increase our collective impact. And finally, the last bullet on the slide is to increase on an ongoing basis the amount of grant funding the Anti-Racism Committee provides to community. And then to our last slide then. The Community Safety and Wellbeing Task Force the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, administration, and others have gathered ideas and initiated work on multiple fronts that will move us towards building a safer city. Initiatives like the ones we just shared with you have support of the communities they come from and other partners. We all believe they will make a difference. But we know that the conversations we've had so far are not exhaustive. There are many more leaders, agencies, and individuals in our city with expertise and lived experience we need to hear from. Building on work already started, we are convening a series of community conversations to continue the dialogue, deepen our shared understanding of the issues of community safety and well-being, and bring forward new ideas and solutions. We know that other civic initiatives intersect with this work, such as Edmonton Police Service's commitment to action, the REACH, Edmonton Safety Council, and Poverty Edmonton's work on poverty elimination, and Recover Urban Wellbeing, as well as others. One of the strategies going forward, and this is important, is to begin to weave these threads together. A guiding principle of this work is to do things differently. It is critical that these conversations support community members in co-creating solutions and changes with communities and not just for communities. The conversations will inform how the city and Edmontonians work together to make decisions about community safety and well-being. We will ask questions like, what's most effective and important to tackle first? Can you identify what other actions need to be taken for individuals to feel safe in our city? The initial community conversations will focus on Edmonton's BIPOC communities. We know that community safety and well-being is much broader than our anti-racism work, and that few, if any, of the issues can be isolated one from another. Our conversations with BIPOC community are a starting point. We will expand the communities that we are in conversation with. As we continue this work to build a safe, diverse, and equitable city, we acknowledge that Edmontonians experiencing the issues associated with community safety and well-being should not be tasked with solving the problems, these issues alone. Their diverse experiences and viewpoints, coupled with our deep commitment to listen and work together, will create solutions to make real and lasting changes in our community. So that concludes our overview, Mr. Chair. We can now go to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smythe. We will now go to questions, and I'll start with Councillor Tang. You selected this item, so please proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the presentation. And thank you for, answering some of my questions just even now as you presented. I have a lot. I might need a couple rounds, but I'll start with the grants. So if I understand, the community well-being and safety, you define community as BIPOC community specifically in Edmonton. Yes, okay. And, at the recent anti-racism advisory council presentation, we discussed at length, the granting process and how that granting process involved community and how to distribute power. And I'm curious about the process that you've arrived at, the decisions for those two particular initiatives, the anti-racism one aside, because I think I understand there. How was the community involved? And there are many, many initiatives on the ground that is happening. Why these two in particular? One thing that I'm seeing that's very absent for me throughout this report and the discussion is, anything related to mutual aid. Many of those are not necessarily registered organizations. They're happening, spontaneously but organized. What is our history working with those organizations? Because I certainly see them having a critical role in community well-being and safety for our most vulnerable Edmontonians. So if you can walk me through a bit of that decision-making process.
Ask Jackie Ford to weigh in first.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. The two items, or the two grants that you see in front of you were, they were immediate responses to very specific racial incidents in our city. So those two particular, the incidents and the funding, were outside of the parameters, not the parameters, the timing of the grants from ARAC. So we brought them forward today because we think that they are timely and have community buy-in, and actually it was a community that came to us and said, could we please try this? But the timing just didn't fit in with the ARAC grants. And as to your question with community, or with mutual aid groups, we've started as the City of Edmonton, we've met with all of them on separate occasions, sometimes collectively as a group, sometimes individually. We've worked with them to try and solve some of their more immediate tactical issues that they have on the ground. And I can tell you that this evening, their meeting, they've been invited to a meeting with Homeward Trust as well. I think you will find in the city and throughout the homeless serving community a great desire to help those groups, because we know the work that they're doing on the ground is so valuable. So I think you'll see more and more interactions between what I would call the more organized parts of this sector and those groups, because they do provide, as I think everyone in this room knows, incredible on-the-ground work, and we've all committed to helping them do that.
And a quick final point, Councillor. These two initiatives were brought to our attention through the chair of ARAC. So that's how the process, on those two items were brought to that's why they're here today.
And moving forward, you see the ARAC as really the channel to help make some of those decisions for the community-led actions.
We do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think I'm conscious, Mr. Smythe, you just said that, part of the moving forward work is to really weave many of the different threads that's happening currently. And I was really, want to see mutual aid as part of that ecosystem building as well. This is an issue that I've followed very closely as a community member. I even spoke to council back at a June 30th meeting as a member of the Recover Catalyst group. I don't see that kind of reference in the community insight. And I just want to emphasize how tightly, directly connected they are to community well-being and safety. And so one of the things I've noticed, because at that time, there were two other reports related to the motion proposed on June 30th. One is the joint dispatch model, and one is the urban well-being. And I think that will just be helpful for context setting for some of us newer council members. And I'm curious about what happened to the recommendations that came out of those two reports, as they were directly related to community well-being and safety.
Thank you, Councillor. The work that Recover is doing, you're correct. There is a report that had some suggested work that was directly related to the community task force work. I can tell you that the team is working on some of those as we speak, and also there will be at budget time, there'll be some a request for ongoing funding. There's a service package coming for ongoing funding of Recover. We look at Recover as sort of one of those parts of the weaving fabric that we have to put together. There's task force work, there's REACH, there's ARAC, there's Recover, and the Recover well-being lens you will see sort of woven within the fabric of all the work that we're doing on this file. And as Mr. Smythe mentioned earlier, there's lots of threads in the city to pull together, and Recover is definitely one of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jens.
Thank you. One of the comments I've heard from a number of folks has been around the challenges with arguably the two biggest threats to safety in our community for the most Edmontonians are the inability to have safe, secure housing, and also the toxic drug supply and issues related to harm reduction. I realize this may not have been the exact mandate, but I'm just reading the language in part in the recommendation bullet 3. It talked about redirecting saving to fund supportive housing, and also about other social safety net ecosystems. So I would see, as my reading, that there could be action here around harm reduction, safe consumption, as well as more direct push of housing. While the recommendations all cited are worthy and important, I'm just wondering about the as we hear more and more about we're in a tough budget, we're in limited funds, how do those different competing priorities weigh into this administration recommendation?
Councillor, our starting point was to since this funding was available, to get it into community through ARAC. So that was a starting point. Certainly the other ideas we put up on that one slide are really just initial, as I said in presentation, just initial starting points. Certainly the issues you've brought up would absolutely be scoped into the community conversations, and then we come back to council with a strategy and further recommendations. And it is, I just got to emphasize as well, it's certainly well beyond just the $11 million. And that's ongoing funding, but it's got to be part of that's part of it, but it's a much bigger plan going forward in terms of community safety and well-being.
I guess, so what I'm hearing the administration say is it will come, be patient, but I'm wondering why, for example, the $1.2 million now couldn't be allocated into housing as opposed to the ARAC work now.
It was just getting legs on. I mean, certainly the housing file will require significantly more than just that amount. And in terms of, we believe that the kind of projects that were in community can get action right away. Do you want to add to that, Jackie?
But with respect, I mean, it'll require a lot more. It'll probably require 100 times that. But even an incremental investment of $1.2 million now into our winter shelter strategy, as we have many folks affected by racism sleeping in the cold, wouldn't this be? I guess I'm wondering, because we haven't had the full budget conversation together. So I know it's challenging. You're working with an inherited mandate from a previous council on a budget framework that we haven't fully revised yet. But I guess if we go back to the hierarchy of needs and basic shelter and minimizing deaths from toxic drugs, I would wonder in the what most needs doing if this should be prioritized first.
Councillor, yeah, I mean, certainly that we'll take council's direction on that. We believe the first and foremost priority was the urgency to get project-based dollars into community to deal with anti-racism. Again, there wasn't any comprehensive science behind that, but it was just that urgency, knowing full well that there has to be setting priorities, but this money was basically earmarked, as you said, by a previous council to derive anti-racism work. New council can weigh in and provide different direction, but that was our starting point, and that's hence the recommendation today.
I've lost my shot clock. I can't tell if I'm over time, but how long? Then, well, I would say right now, Mr. Mayor, I'm reticent to, or Mr. Chair, I guess. Mr. Chair, I'd be reticent to support the recommendation right now just because of the other critical investments that are right in front of us, and not that these are not worthy and they should be funded, but just when I hear from constituents right now about the literal life and death situation we're in many parts of the South Side, we need to marshal every penny we can, and that would be my feedback right now for administration.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. I'll just note that this will ultimately need a council decision. So committee can decide to recommend this action, or committee can send this to council without a recommendation. That is the will of this committee. But ultimately, because it's money, all of council will vote when this goes to council at the next council meeting.
So if I may, a point of order. So if I'm saying I'm not happy with it, my options would be either to vote against the report or to move a motion to refer it back to administration. How would you prefer to handle it?
If so, we will have this conversation, and then and I guess this is a hypothetical, if a member of committee moves the recommendation, which is to say committee recommends that we make these choices to council, council will then consider committee's recommendation at the next council meeting. But ultimately, council will vote where the money goes.
Right. So the path today is receive for information or not.
Or not. Correct.
And if we do not, does that kill it? Is it, or like, does it work like if a motion's voted down, you can't bring it back? Or does it basically say, give it back to admin and let them come back again?
There would, I guess hypothetically, could be a bit of a limbo situation created if we simply voted against the recommendation. So what would be better would be to refer it back to administration for further work. Remembering though, that if we're going to consider this money, which is 2021 money, at the next budget conversation, or try to get this money out to community going back is consuming time.
Duly noted.
Okay. Mayor Sohi.
Yeah, just to follow up on Councillor Jen's questions, I think we do need to have a holistic approach around community safety from every aspect. People who are being impacted by drug poisoning, people who are experiencing homelessness, and those who experience racism in their communities where they live and when they are in public places, right? I think we'll have that opportunity as part of our 2022 budget or sometime in 2022 as we think about these broader issues.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the plan is that we bring back in the first quarter all of these pieces woven together.
Yeah.
With the strategy.
Yeah. And as part of, that is why you're recommending this one-time funding, because you have this funding available. You don't want to stop the work. You want to actually do more work in 2022 on anti-racism and these two particular initiatives. At the same time, we grapple with the bigger picture issues.
Absolutely correct, Mr. Mayor. And that bigger picture strategy will then impact and direct the 4-year budget that council will work on towards the end of next year.
Yeah.
This is really a 1-year short-term immediate recommendation that we're making to council.
Yeah, because just looking at this issue and the opiate crisis issue in isolation from the overall, how much our budget is operating budget 1.4 billion, right? And the operating budget, not capital. What is our annual budget?
For our city?
Yeah.
I shouldn't be taking words out of our CFO's mouth here. I think it's in the order of $2 billion.
That's
I mean, it's
everything. Like, what is our operating budget?
So I can weigh in here. The total operating budget is $3.1 billion, but if you're just looking at the tax levy, but if you're just looking at the budget under the city of Edmonton's control, so taking out police, is closer to 2.6 billion.
What is the tax levy of
Includes
that?
utilities and everything.
What is the tax levy contribution?
So the net operating requirement, the net tax levy portion of the budget is about 1.7 billion.
Yeah, okay. So we spend about 1.7 billion of property tax revenue, right? So I think that's where I think Michael would be helpful for us to have that conversation in a broader sense, where all that money is going and where that money need to be prioritized based on the priorities of this council in a broader, holistic way.
a point taken, Mr. Mayor. Again, this is very specific, 1-year, short-term, project-based.
Yeah.
To allocate the 2021 money.
Okay. And the 10 million that is available for next year, and the 5 areas that you have identified for future investments, those are the guiding principles that will determine where that money goes for that 10 million, right?
And it's $11 million, Mr. Mayor?
11, yeah. Okay.
And it's, the key point there is that it's ongoing funding.
Yeah, that is ongoing funding.
It's ongoing funding, and none of it has been, council has not made any, we have not brought forward
Yeah.
any recommendations in
Yeah.
terms of how that money could be recommended. So that will be fully in council's wheelhouse to determine where it goes.
Okay, good. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Hi, thank you. Just to get clarification on that 11 million, so that's split between 2021 and 2022. So the ongoing funding, is that 5.5 million a year, or is that 11 million a year?
No, it's 11. The 5.5 the report addresses is the money that was from 2021 only.
Okay,
So we'll have $11 million, council will have $11 million of ongoing funding, basically starting in January of next year.
okay. So depleting this 5.5 now for 2021, there's still going to be 5.5. We have a presentation by End Poverty coming up here, who's also looking for additional funds, so that can come out of the 2022 dollars, is that right?
It could, that would be council's decision,
Okay,
yes.
okay. Okay. I just didn't want to give away all the money if there's
Double
other
count.
priorities. And then, so you mentioned the Sisters Dialogue is just being piloted in Northeast Edmonton?
It is.
Okay, is there any indication that it would continue? Like, is EFCL looking at other areas of the city, specifically Southeast Edmonton?
Councillor, my understanding is they're going to try it here and see how it works.
Okay.
It will be their first joint initiative, so rather than trying to expand it too early or too soon, they've decided that this is the site that they would like to pilot it at.
Okay, all right. And then with 45,000 being allocated to Sisters Dialogue, I'm guessing that it's volunteers that will be the walkers? Or is that going to be paid from honorariums? Or?
To be quite frank, I'm not exactly sure of the details. It is a joint project between ECF, the Community League, and the Sisters. So I think they're still working on the actual hard details on how it will be delivered.
Well, I'd just like to thank those volunteers then for providing that service to the women. And I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as chair, is there still confusion around how the money flows and where all the money's at?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So let's talk about how the money flows at 1:30, because we're not going to finish this item before noon, and we cannot extend orders. So we'll just do a quick how money flows kind of one-on-one for a couple minutes. Can we do that, Mr. Smythe?
Absolutely.
Okay. You're next, Councillor Stevenson. Go ahead.
That's great. I mean, I think just for clarity, so there was 5.5 held in 2021, and we're seeing the recommendations for spending that. Can you tell me what's happening to the 5.5 that was held for 2022?
Maybe our finance, Stacy, can you weigh in on that one?
Yeah, so when this money came when we stripped this money out of the police budget, we did it in two tranches. $5.5 million in 2021 and $5.5 million in 2022, both of those base level adjustments. So 2021 money was detailed on the slide, and there's $1.45 million left. Because we only allocated that to one-time items, that means for 2022, there's $11 million in base funding on an ongoing basis going forward. Does that help?
It does in some ways. So I understand from 2022 onwards, we're looking at 11 million a year. I guess I'm just unclear what happened to that 5.5 that was from the original tranche of 11 million. We had 5.5 taken out in 2021. My understanding is that there had been the other half, the 5.5 had been for 2022.
So it's incremental. So in 2021, we took 5.5 million and we allocated that one time. And so when we take it and we allocate it one time, because we've only allocated it one time, it's still in the base. So in 2021, we use it one time, and then it's there in 2022. You could use it again one time and keep doing one-time things with it, or you can do an ongoing allocation, at which point it's in the base budget. So that 5.5, because we only used it one time, is now there in 2022 on an ongoing basis, and then we add to it the 2022 allocation of the second tranche of 5.5 million to get $11 million ongoing.
Great, thank you. Okay, that provides the clarity. And so then I think maybe my broader question, I really appreciate the suggested allocations for 2021. My concern is that the sense of urgency I feel around community safety is just much greater than what I'm seeing in terms of this proposal. And while I absolutely appreciate and agree with your ethic around working with the community to identify those priorities, I do feel that some of those priorities have been very clearly identified in terms of crisis diversion investments, the encampment outreach teams, My concern is revisiting this in Q1 of 2022 is that we're leaving people without those additional supports over the winter. So, you know, my thinking is that there's an opportunity to act just a bit faster, particularly on those items that have already been identified by the community for immediate investment over the winter. So that would be the crisis diversion team. We have a proposal from them for $250,000 to expand their crisis diversion fleet. Reach Edmonton, another $250,000 to expand their neighborhood organizing initiatives. We have some from the DBA to do some of their outreach work, and also expanding the encampment outreach program. It mentions there's 9 social workers currently, and that they don't have enough capacity. So in my mind, you know, just double that capacity. Again, really appreciating the need for that more holistic conversation moving forward, but recognizing that there are these really immediate needs that I think we need to act more quickly on. So to phrase that into a question, would there be opportunities to activate, you know, I think that all comes to about, I had jotted it down somewhere, but that's about 2 million. It's under 2 million in immediate funding, 2 million of that 11, so that it's ready to go at the start of 2022.
Certainly appreciate and certainly accept and agree with the urgency. I mean, there's certainly these issues that you flagged that have been in front of us for some time now are critical. But we do believe that we did need to circle back, you know, for basically another check-in to set those priorities out. And you know, with a new council and what's happening in community, we thought we should take time, and as we've talked a few times about connecting the various initiatives that really do relate to each other. And I think we have a fair bit of heavy lifting to do in terms of connecting those dots, as Ms. Ford said, that weave diagram piece. But certainly, just trying to brainstorm on the spot here a little bit. As part of our budget process over the next few weeks, those motions or ideas could be introduced during that time as we get into budget discussions. Stacey, do you have any other reflections on how potentially to weave in funding for these new and different ideas?
No, maybe the only thing that I would add is recognizing that there's a lot of different things that council may want to do. Part of the priority-based budgeting process will incorporate that understanding in order to be able to look at resource reallocation on an ongoing basis so that you have the funding to address what you would like to do in the future.
I'm out of time, but I'd love to come back for a second round. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I felt extremely uncomfortable reading this report, and I felt uncomfortable because I'm seeing that we've taken money from the police, and it's kind of like the dialogue is that this money is now can be allocated to a plethora of community safety initiatives that may or may not link back to actually what the purpose is of reducing the pressure on the police. So I'm very concerned about that. I don't see anywhere in this report any kind of theory of change linking how these specific actions and recommendations lead to a decrease in police pressures as we've taken money away from them, with the exception of one point, which was under one specific thing. So I would like to ask administration, what is our theory of change with regards to the recommendations that you have put forward?
One response, and then I'll pass the mic over perhaps. The allocation of those funds would be obviously in keeping with the mandate of the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. So if they follow, you know, their mandate, why council set them up, I mean, it may be a thin line, but I mean, ideally that will impact, you know, some of the racist practices in our city, which then the next step would be, the expectation is that would reduce impact on service, our calls for police. Now, I recognize that that's a sequence of logic there that is somewhat stretched. There's no question, but the ARAC, again, they're a fairly new organization, but I think with the last cycle of recommendations that they brought to committee, certainly, had some very, very strong projects that they're recommended to council to fund. Do you want to weigh in, Jackie?
And just a quick or a thought around those other ideas, other than those first few that are specific fundings, those are lifted from the task force recommendations. They're very much part of that. They're consistent with them, and in the task force recommendation was less policing, more community-driven safety initiatives. So that's where those ones come from. They're not fleshed out areas, but they came directly from the task force recommendations.
But you do say in this report that those task force recommendations were a little bit too vague to actually, that's what it says within this report. So I just want to clarify that. So many things could fall under that umbrella, but we're actually creating what I would suggest is we've created a scope creep, because we have lots of things, and I am the first, I've worked in this field for 15 years, to understand the interconnectedness and the complexity in the kind of work that this is creating. However, what I see happening here is that the work is then slipping into trying to be everything for everyone around community safety, rather than and we're setting the police up for failure then, quite frankly. Because if we've taken funding away from the police and we're looking at this as a system, what are we doing to then make sure that funding allows the police to do their job without that funding in their cycle? Does that make sense what I'm saying? So if you've taken 11 million from the police, they have 11 million less to work with to do their job. So what we want to see is then this funding going to community-based safety initiatives that mitigate calls to police, that alleviate the pressure that is currently on police and is growing, quite frankly, as well. Am I correct in my understanding?
Well, certainly I think everybody is focused on that prevention element. We've spent a lot of energy and resources, addressing the impacts. But
Sorry, I just recognize my time and I want to make sure. One of them talks specifically about victim services, so that's not prevention, because victim services is after crime has already happened. So I want to just correct you on that right there. Second of all, in order for prevention to work, you have to have a grounded theory of change, and that is 100% absent from this report. Would you agree?
I'm not sure that I would agree, insofar as that these other ideas, other than those two, are still in the process of being created. We don't know what that new enforcement or that new encampment strategy will look like. We don't know exactly where those bylaw enforcement, that training is going to happen. So I think it might be premature to say that that's not the case.
Well, I'll give you an example of the second one with the sisters, right?
I'm sorry, Councillor Rutherford, your time is
Okay,
up.
I will
You need
circle
a
back.
second round. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
I was gonna go down a similar route, but I'm gonna keep it because it's 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes and it's right before lunch. Your recommendation is that we add more funding to various nonprofits around the city who are doing work. One of the critiques out there, and I don't want to validate whether or not I don't want to get into the details of that, but that we continue to fund as a city various initiatives through a variety of NGOs, and that we, and it ranges from REACH, which is sort of a senior, I'll say that they're sort of a large partner in crime prevention and getting people out of the pipeline, so to speak, to smaller community partners. And one of the critiques I have heard is that we measure the impact of each of those investments differently. So my question to you, and I think this is going to become more prescient as we go into the 4-year budget cycle, is how are we, and I'll put a caveat on that there is a lot to be said of the different methodologies that are used to measure impact. I want to acknowledge that, but I just put it to the side. Are we looking at how we measure impact of these investments as we are sort of committing to add more partnerships in this space?
Certainly, Councillor, that's on our radar screen, the notion of collective impact, and that there's, and again, relating to what we refer to as the weave and connecting these various streams of work in community. I guess frankly, they could be better connected to make it more positive. So certainly that is very much on our radar screen, to connect those dots, to bring those, the work that those organizations are doing, so that we work on these files in an integrated kind of way. And we know that we can collectively do better. There's absolutely no question. So that's where our current thinking is. And again, these organizations, they certainly do talk and we do work together, but really measuring that impact is a next step. And then communicating that effectively to council and to the community.
And so as we go into the 22 budget cycle, we're going to get a lot of requests, some of them competing for financial resources. There's also a fiduciary piece to this. So we have to know the impact that the money that this council or the last council allocated is having, so that we can sort of responsibly allocate future dollars where it will have an impact. So it sounds like you're sort of developing a process. Do you need council direction on this? Do you need, are we going to get an update on this methodology in 22 at any time? I'm wondering sort of what are the next steps in that?
Councillor, I believe we have adequate direction. When we come back in the first quarter of next year, our expectation is that we're starting to weave this work together with the overall strategy around community safety, well-being, anti-racism, and how those things intersect and where they don't intersect. So I believe the motions that council, previous council and this council have passed provide us that direction, and very much when we do come back in that first quarter, having done some conversations with community, talked to some community leadership, that strategy that we'll bring forward in front of council should effectively address that collective impact, those kind of metrics and measures that we know council's looking for.
Great. I'll leave it there. I know it's noon now. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a reminder of the orders of the day. We are to adjourn now at noon and resume at 1:30. We do have another committee meeting over lunch, so I'm reluctant to extend any orders at this point. We have a time specific at 2:30. We have our recess at 3:30 typically, and orders of the day are that we're ending the meeting at 5. And we have several other items to get through. So not to limit conversation or debate, but we may need a strategy about what gets bumped up to the next council meeting. And as a reminder, the next committee meeting is January 17th. So kicking to the next committee meeting means missing all of the budget conversations in between. Just food for thought. See you at 1:30. Thank you.